Not every young person in the system is a criminal. Sometimes they are survivors, placed in situations they never chose to be in. Maybe they've been in 3, 4, 5, or even more different homes already. Some by the age of 10. Maybe they've had to learn new rules, new people, new environments over and over again. And that instability creates a mindset, a belief system that they've learned that real quick that nothing is really stable. So in that instability, they learned that people have the wherewithal and the capacity to profess to them that they love them, that they care about them, that they want to be there for them. And the broken ground of that trust into that belief is immediately shattered because while saying these things and professing these things of love, care, often the ingredients for a safe and sufficient and secure home is immediately vanished because they leave soon after. They leave for a myriad of believing that not knowing how to handle traumatic responses and experiences from youth in care who have trauma, deep trauma, that is not quite surface level that you cannot oftentimes love your way into. It takes time. It takes patience. But because of the byproduct of that instability, and because they've seen things that they weren't supposed to see that young, and feelings they didn't know how to process, it now creates a bigger issue as nobody really sat down with them for youth in care who's experienced trauma either before care or during their time in care to say, this is how you deal with these things, how you deal with being physically, mentally, verbally, sexually abused, psychologically abused. This is how you deal with that. There's no roadmap or resource for many of youth. So instead, the conduit of the change that they create or the solutions that they create themselves is that they adapt. They shut down or they act out or they move on. They move like they're always in survival mode. And then one day, that being before or during or even after care, they make a decision based off of all of the things that are built up and they find temporarily or even find it just that this is what needs to happen. And then they're in the system. And today we're going to talk about that on Outreach with Reggie. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Outreach with Reggie, where we don't just talk about the world as it is. We talk about how to change it. I'm your host, Reggie Holloway, and if this is your first time, welcome to OWR. I'm happy you chose Outreach with Reggie as your place to listen to the podcast or your podcast. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, and rate. And if this is your second time, third, fourth, or you're just returning altogether, I thank you for choosing this podcast as your podcast home. No matter wherever you're listening, wherever you're listening, whenever you're listening. And I promise we will be back to our regular Friday releases. Time has just gotten away from me as many updates have been happening. If you've been joining on Instagram, on the Instagram journey, I thank you because you can see the many moves that are being made. But with that being said, how I came to today's topic, which is misunderstood. foster youth in the juvenile court system or juvenile justice system. I recently reconnected with my old caseworker, who I spent my time when I was 8 years old to 17 when she retired. We reconnected this past Saturday. And for those who celebrated Easter this past Sunday, happy Easter. I hope you had a great time. We just talked about where I was during that time period, mentally, emotionally, or even just physically. Who I was then versus who I was now. And we talked about a lot of things I dealt with because of trauma, the things I was exposed to, and how that tended to lead me to a lot of places. And luckily, I'm fortunate to where I am now, to see where God has led me. But within that, we also talked about the ones that aren't always blessed to have that form of security, form of assurance, reassurance, or clarity over what they had to endure. Even for me, it took many years of self-discovery, brokenness, even this year going into therapy, to really understand or to forgive myself for the things that I had to experience, even for the things that was not my fault. There's many of youth who are in care or age out of care that are unfairly labeled. And because of what they had to do, the trauma that they had to endure, and the things that we don't often talk about that go on in the foster care system, they are forced to face the challenges many adults still struggle with head on. And how they respond to the challenges of these lives oftentimes lead to a few unfortunate realities. Some make it. Some are able to have a good life, a good processes of what they can do, be everything that they want to be, and go on to challenge themselves to venture off to everything that they want to. But in the process of that, for the ones that don't, we often have to talk about those who enter the juvenile court system, and for those who unfortunately end up in the Department of Corrections. I myself, throughout my time in care, lashed out. I lashed out because I wanted to be home. I missed my mom. I missed my family. And how I got into care was I had a single mom who cared for me, loved me like she loved all of my siblings. But unfortunately, due to the reality of working 12 hours, she wasn't able to. And me not having the understanding that I did now versus than I did then, it tended to cause a lot of traumatic experiences. Being in foster homes with nothing but the mom, and she would yell at me. Being in homes where there was a mom and dad, and they would say things and do things that, for some reasons, more times enough, caused trauma. And because of the trauma, because of the things I had to endure as a kid, with the memory and the wherewithal, what I've known my mom to have done, and missing my mom, created a lot of traumatic responses, which created a paper trail. Not so much as a paper trail of incarceration, but I did get arrested a few times as a youth because of lashing out, expelled, suspended from school, moving from place to place. And as I moved from placement to placement in the foster care system, I had a paper trail on me. And I unfortunately did go into the DJJ, but I wasn't DJJ. I just had very strong paperwork that showed a lot of things that was wrong, which is fine. Fine in a sense of my story didn't end there. I stand as a college graduate and an advocate, but to get back focused on the meat of the matter of today, I think when you have a paper trail on you as a youth, it reflects in a sense of like how you are seen in the foster care system. When you come in, and we'll go ahead and move into the first segment. We'll move into the first segment that is how you are seen. But it reflects. Because what changes the moment a young person enters the juvenile justice system or has a disturbance within their foster home is the fact of how you are seen. They go from being a kid, a good kid, being a good kid to being labeled a troubled kid, a bad kid, a problem. And once that label's there, a lot of people stop being curious. And it doesn't take much. It could be a simple, a foster parent may want you to do something, and you say no. You could be labeled as combative. It could be as simple as, oh, you may not get the best grades or you get into a fight. But I want to target specifically when you have a traumatic response to something that may be innocent at heart, but what the foster parent may perceive to be innocent, or discipline that may be triggering. I'll use an example. Johnny, for the sake of exercise, Johnny comes from a home that he's been physically and verbally abused by his biological father, and screamed at, being beat on for the way that he dresses, the way that he has his room, and his athletic abilities. And because of what he had endured from his father, he's put in the foster care system. And let's say Mr. and Mrs. Johnson welcome him into his home. Welcome him into their home. And very innocently, Johnny may have picked up, they're teaching him how to cook. And Johnny forgets he left something on the oven, left something on the stove. I apologize. And something burns. And instead of saying, Johnny, something's burning, there's screaming, like, John, you can't do that. Or a very strong reprimanding of yelling and strong discipline, banning him from the kitchen. And Johnny responds, but he responds in a way not of a hopeful, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, I won't do it again, but no, you nor anyone will get to talk to me like how my father did. So now he's yelling back, cursing back, and may do one or two things. A decision. Nothing too big, but just enough to be put on paperwork, reported, and now he's taking medication. Now he's taking placebo pills, and now he's taking a lot of things, especially from his caseworker. And now Johnny is either on a fast track to be incarcerated, or in the next place that he's moved from, because the Johnsons have now decided over some occurrence, they no longer want him in the home. So Johnny moves. The next place he goes to, that incident is now on record. So now Johnny doesn't get to cook at all. Not only does he not get to cook, Johnny is told, shamed, being told that's not going to happen in Miss Kathy's house. And you won't get a chance to. We've already told her your whole story without Johnny even saying a word. Now there's a very big space of tension between the two, cutting it with a knife. And that paper trail follows Johnny because now he's feeling like he's a jailer or someone who's a felon. Someone who, unfortunately, is judged by paper before they are by personality and who they never got a chance to be. Because what they don't know is that Johnny is a straight A student that loves the Lord and is very involved in after-school activities, loves the code. But they never get a chance to learn that because what paperwork shows. Same as the youth who go incarcerated or arrested that shows up on their paperwork. It doesn't show that foster care is on there when you enter DJJ or the Department of Corrections. It doesn't show, hey, this young man, this young woman, or this young person altogether has been in the foster care system, homeless because they signed out with no form of direction, is dealing with multiple mental health issues, that they no longer have access to their medication or therapy or any therapeutic resources, so now they lash out. The only thing they see is the action, and the consequence follows soon after. But that all stems back from how are we able to see the youth? Because when we stop asking what happened to you and we start asking what's wrong with you, there's a shift that's right there and everything changes. So as I said, what people don't see, and I've seen this close enough to know, instability does something to you. Imagine not knowing where you're going to sleep next month. Imagine finally getting comfortable somewhere and then being told you have to pack your stuff up again. Imagine learning not to get too attached to people because they might not be there next week. That kind of life, it builds something in you. Sometimes it's anger, and sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's just survival. And then we look at that same young person, expect them to trust authority, to regulate emotions, to follow structure, when no one ever taught them how. Because you can't expect stability from someone who only experienced survival. Upon entering adulthood, I was able to go, like I said earlier, I've been in 30 plus foster homes before, in placements altogether, before I aged out of the foster care system at 21. And we talked, me and my case manager, who I reunited with this past weekend, we talked about how that created a lot of very hindering social skills. Not because I was just awkward. I mean, I may have been socially awkward. And of course, I was socially awkward in high school. But I would say to that, can't really engage environment where you're not really knowing if you're going to be there that long. You kind of get used to the people who you kind of get used to saying hi and bye a whole lot. It kind of became like a matchmaker thing, right? You get the filling out process. It's like trying your favorite ice cream, right? I was like more of a rocky road. Some people loved the rocky road. Some people didn't really have patience for rocky road. Maybe they liked a little bit of vanilla. Some people liked pistachio, and others liked what you call it, butter pecan. We'll say that. But social, it creates a social anxiety because it's like you can't find too many can't find stable relationships. And even when you do find stable relationships, it garners a sense of, at least for me, it garnered a sense of feeling as if, all right, when is this going to end? Or when is it going to expire? When are they going to leave unexpectedly so I can prepare myself? And even within that, how painful that is. And sometimes that led to self-sabotage in a way. Because sometimes you do find places where something is so good, even as you enter adulthood, peace follows you. You get to do everything you get to achieve. But because it's so foreign, because stability is so foreign, self-sabotage happens. And it reoccurs every time good things happen. Not because you just are completely against it. When I wasn't against it, it showed up in too many faces in too many places, and it took a lot of self-discovery to forgive and to know that you and me belong in those spaces where stability can be present. But that takes time. Because as you are relearning new rules, new people, new environments over and over again, you are opening yourself up to people. And imagine opening up yourself to someone and then being moved before that trust has time to grow. That's something. And then we're supposed to say to that young person, that same young person, or the same person altogether, that has anger and trust issues, that has reactions that don't always make sense to us, that we care, that we love them, that we trust them, and it takes some time. And sometimes what they went through doesn't always make sense. But what makes perfect sense when you understand, I'm sorry, when that same person has anger and trust issues, has reactions that don't always make sense to us, it always makes perfect sense of their responses based off of what they had to experience before. Or in short, we're able to understand how they react due to what they've been through. I should have just said that. Sorry to the listener that's listening. It's like, what is he talking about? But within that hiccup, I'm still human. And I just hope that you charge it to my head and not to my heart. As we move to this next segment, we have to understand the moment we miss. A lot of the times, it's just one moment that changes every single thing. One argument, one reaction, and one situation that escalates. And now we're sitting in front of a judge. They're sitting in front of a judge, shocked, watching their future being held within a gavel. But here's what I keep thinking about. Does everyone in that room really understand how that young person got there? Do they see the trauma, the moves constantly from home to home, placement to placement, facility to facility, group home to group home, abuse, neglect? Do they see these things? The instability, or do they see just the charge? And sometimes it's just one moment. I remember I was listening to like early $1 million worth of game, and something that was said was it was a story Wallow told, and it was about how it took someone, I think 3 to 5 minutes to be in prison for 20 years. 3 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes. Just one moment in time. But when we think about that, one decision, one reaction, one situation that escalates, and we apply that to foster care, we're able to see that all it takes is a retriggering of the things that the youth have had to experience in life. And that doesn't just stop when the youth enter foster care or even exit foster care, age out foster care, or when they're adopted or when things get better. It takes time. But within time, for those who have the capacity to have patience with the youth, I challenge you to do so. Because all it takes is one infliction, one raising of the voice, one hit, one wrong word said for it to be a move or decision made that leads them right in front of that judge. But as I say that, I'm going to move into this next thing where I call it the pipeline. A lot of times it is a pipeline, a very big pipeline between foster care and, unfortunately, the Department of Corrections. Because as foster care leads to instability, a lot of times, instability leads to behavior, and behavior leads to discipline, and discipline leads to system involvement. And if nothing interrupts that pattern, that same young person ends up in deeper into the system. And eventually, the adult system, going from Department of Juvenile Justice to Department of Corrections in a matter between turning 17 and a half to 18 years of age. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. We didn't lose them in that one moment, that one infliction, that one trauma response. We lost them in the lack of support along the way, a lack of space to be held, and a lack of understanding, capacity to have understanding. But as I talk about this, I asked the question earlier, excuse me. I asked the question, and I apologize for the listeners that my sneeze shocked you. But what does the judge see? I remember I remember my first time speaking in front of a lot of juvenile court judges. It was October 2024, and I was nervous. And a lot of the juvenile court judges just don't know about foster care. I mean, they do through CASA and through having representation, but The the necessary things to prevent that or to understand that no one really hears from the kid oftentimes enough unless you really have a good case manager and CASA worker that is willing to represent you. I remember him telling me, or one of the judges tell me, that they don't hear stories, they just see numbers when I went to speak. And as I'm listening off these resources that the youth can obtain, I just remember talking, and a lot of them just didn't know how to regulate the youth or put them in services that can take them away from their current environments that may lead them in one way or the other down this pipeline. And as I look on Google right now, according to Juvenile Law Center, nearly 25 to nearly 70% of former foster youth are arrested or incarceration within the first 3 years of leaving care. And over 90% of foster youth with 5 or more placements face juvenile justice system involvement, often driven by high instability, trauma, and lack of support systems. A lot of these times with youth who are actively leaving or choose to run away, run right into the arms of law. And as I look more into the data and statistics, over 90% with 5 or more foster care placements, nearly 30% of youth who were incarcerated in young adulthood with a 42% rate of lifetime incarceration by the age of 20, arrest rates up to 70% of former foster youth are arrested at least once by 26. That's not my story. I'll say that now. By 17, over half of youth in foster care experienced an arrest, conviction, or an overnight stay in a correctional facility. But why? Why does me saying those numbers truly matter? It matters because if we are not able to have honest discussion, regulation about trauma amongst foster youth that may lead to experiences, leads them into arms of law, then we're bound to repeat the same cycle over and over again. So let me walk you through something. As I've talked to the judge and I've been able to work with him and work alongside him to show him that being through my experience and through the experiences of others who are on the other side of not having to go through the arms of the law, but working alongside them to make sure that these situations don't happen. Honest discussions. When a young person enters foster care, they move from placement to placement. They may go to school to school. And if they start acting out, it's not because they want attention, but because they need stability. They need someone who may provide stability, no matter if it's a foster parent or someone who's involved in foster care or someone in the community or someone that's taking time to say that this young man, this young person just needs a good role model, a good mentor that can show them beyond and not label them. Because once they get labeled behavioral, the school discipline increases, suspensions, maybe expulsions. And now they're out of structured environments that more often than they are in them. They're out of these structured environments. Because one situation happens and now they're DJJ, and once you're labeled, it's over. And even in the school systems themselves, they don't know what foster care is. They just know a young person is having a traumatic experience because some kid is bullying them about their experience. They may say one or two things about what led them into foster care and how they may not have their own bio mom or dad. And now a fight happens, they lash out, and now they're mislabeled once again. And now they're in psychoeducation with the IEP, what makes it harder. So now there's a learning curve. And now it creates a separation between kids with normal education and kids who have curved learning. Some are into alternative school where there are less of a healthy environment, more environments that are destructive, dangerous, and increases the factor or the possibility of going directly into the arms of the law or the Department of Corrections and or juvenile justice. But I can go on and on about that. But here's the reality as we move into the next segment. Because there's all types of statistics beyond this, as we just named. You can look at the numbers, how early youth are getting incarcerated, the racial disparities, black, white, Latino, so on and so forth. How many have been to foster care? But honestly, you don't even need numbers sometimes because people have lived this. And the common thread is this: trauma without support. I could talk to you about, oh, who's been arrested more? What race has been arrested more? By what age they've been arrested more? What community? But the common theme is trauma without support. More and more now that there's been an introduction to trauma informed training or trauma training or trauma informed practices. But the common thread, no matter the numbers, no matter the crime, I won't say that, but no matter the numbers, no matter the race, class, rich, poor, but especially within the foster care system, the common thread is trauma without support. And that means how much we are able to hold conversation about trauma and confront it head on. So, accountability versus understanding, because this is important too. Because I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying there should not be accountability, but accountability without understanding is just punishment. If someone is destroying your house, I understand. You have to hold the kid accountable. If someone is punching you, or burning your house down, destroying your property, lashing out at school, there has to be accountability there. But accountability without understanding how we got to this point is just punishment. And if you don't understand trauma, you will make the unfortunate mistake of misreading the behavior. And if you don't understand instability, you'll expect consistency that was never built. And that's where the system misses it sometimes. And when you look at the data, it confirms what so many people have already lived. You'll see how early youth are getting pulled into the system, the racial disparities, how many of them you'll see how many of them have ties to foster care. And you'll see something else too. High levels of trauma with very little access to healing. So, I get it. I didn't make this episode. I didn't make this episode because to say, oh, I don't believe anybody should get arrested because trauma, they have traumatic experiences, so that excuses them from crime. That excuses them to facing the law. What I am saying is, in order to stop the cycle that occurs as a rise of, or the pipeline, to end the pipeline, cut the pipeline of youth who enter the justice system, we have to understand the barriers and the things and the problems that are currently there. And trauma is the biggest one. So what actually helps? What actually makes a difference? It's not complicated, but it does require intention, consistency. One person who stays, one mentor, one coach, one adult who doesn't give up on them, that goes beyond the paperwork or what it says for them as a foster youth and what says for them beyond what any criminal record has ever said. Access to real therapy, not just short-term fixes, but trauma-informed care that actually helps them process what they've been going through. Programs that give structure, after-school jobs, after-school programs, opportunities to build something within the young person themselves that takes them away from these realities, these environments that may breed a behavior or that may entice a behavior. Because when a young person starts to feel seen, to feel heard, starts to feel supported, they start moving differently. Because support doesn't just change behavior, it changes identity too. So what actually makes a difference? Consistency, one adult who stays, one mentor, one coach, again, just having structure. Even in the summer, as the summer is coming up and as school is starting to go away, summer jobs, workforce development, opportunities to remind a young person that you are more than your worst moment. The worst moments that happened to you and the worst moments that you've done. The right support at the right time can rewrite a whole future if given a chance. So the real question becomes, what kind of system do we want to be? Do we want to have one that reacts after the damage is done, or one that invests before it gets there? Because one is easier, but the other is necessary. This is bigger than one system. This is about how we treat young people who didn't start with the same advantages. It's about whether they're willing to invest in prevention or keep paying for consequences. Because one costs money, but the other costs lives. So, I'll leave you with this. The next time you hear about a young person, that being either in the DJJ system or the Department of Corrections, before you judge them or before you welcome a foster youth into your home and you see this long list of what's on their paperwork, try to understand them. Develop a relationship with them. Leave a space for them to be heard. Try to understand them and then ask yourself, what did they have to survive before they ever got to me or got to this place that they are in? Because if we really want to change outcomes, we have to stop seeing these young people as problems and start seeing them as people who need support long before they're ever seen or their name is on a document or on a record. And I'll leave you with this. Next time you hear about a young person, don't start with judgment, start with curiosity. This is Outreach with Reggie. I'm your host, Reggie Holloway, where we just don't talk about systems, we challenge it too. Stay tuned and take care.